Are you sick of scrolling through Netflix and Hulu searching for movies that are high quality and family friendly? Christian Cinema has thousands of movies available on demand that you can watch anytime, anywhere. When you sign up for a giving membership, a premium offering from Christian Cinema, you can watch 5 free movies every month. Learn more about becoming a giving member at givingcompany.com/giving membership and start watching great movies today. The other side of the road is safe, where we sidestep being bothered and avoid getting involved. But rolling up your sleeves and boldly going where few dare to tread, that's walking through Samaria. Each week on our podcast, we introduce you to the special few who walk in the spirit of the Good Samaritan. On behalf of the Giving Company and your hosts, David Hendrickson and Dan Riveros, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast. I'm your host, Dan Riveros, with my co-host,
David Hendrickson.
What's up, man? Here we are.
All right, so we just need to do the disclaimer for our listeners, right? We've heard from a few of you that you're a little disappointed and upset that we've been off the air for a couple of months. We've had some COVID issues, Dan. We've had some scheduling issues, just general life.
Bright side is we know that you guys love us and we love you too, and we're trying to turn them around as fast as possible.
Thank you for your feedback. That's what we wanted to say.
But we are quality over quantity here, and we're going to deliver the best we can.
And we're here live in the office.
Live in the office, full house.
And we got some peeps with us.
We got some of our favorite peeps.
Favorite peeps.
We got our coworkers. Yeah. And it's Black History Month.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's pretty much the topic of today's show.
Yeah. That's good.
So who do we got, David?
All right. Well, I am super excited to introduce to all of our listeners 3, as Dan mentioned, of our favorites. Darryl Maxey. Daryl has been with us for a number of years. He serves as our brand manager for the Dove website, dove.org. And please go out to dove.org because we just relaunched it for all of you out there. You'll love to see the work that we have done with that website, doing movie reviews, and Daryl is a big, big part of that effort and of that brand. Our associate creative director, who's just a few days from getting married, Laquoya Robinson. Q is in the house. Q, good to see you. Q and I have a lot of fun in the office, Dan, because we always have to mention college sports on this podcast. She's an Alabama fan, and everybody knows I'm a Georgia fan, but nothing but love, right? Q is what we've said. So, that's not what I thought we said, but that's okay. Anyway, and then last but not least, our Chief Experience Officer, George Saffo. George and I have been colleagues and friends for 7 years. George, is hard to believe, with a shared GE background. For those of you that don't know what a Chief Experience Officer does, we combined the experience of our employees with the experience of our users in under one leadership role. So George runs our customer care team and our HR efforts and does a terrific job. So great to have all of you on the Walking Through Samaria podcast.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it is Black History Month, and this is actually one of 2 recordings that we're doing for Black History Month. And Dan, if scheduling would have allowed us, we certainly would have tried to have gotten our regular 4 in a month. But we're going to talk to Daryl and Q and George about Black History Month, about what it means to you all personally, about what it should mean for the company, what it should mean for the country. And most importantly, maybe we want to talk about what does it mean to be a good Samaritan in this topic of racial justice or racial injustice, racial reconciliation? And, you know, Dan, I wish our listeners knew these 3 people as well as we do, because any of them, I would say, has just been a big part of our culture and our values and kind of who we strive to be as a company and who we profess to be as a company. I should probably give a disclaimer. We should give disclaimers, Dan, that I am a Caucasian in my 50s, which puts me in a stereotypical class that we often try to break in this podcast. Do you want to reveal? I mean, Riveros probably gives it away, Dan, but before we go any further, you should probably reveal your...
Yep, full-blooded Latin.
That's right.
32. 32.
So... everybody needs a good millennial is how we've described Dan's role on this podcast. So it was Philip Langford from International Justice Mission that said that. All right, so Let's just dive right in, if you guys don't mind, and just lean into the mic with any thoughts or comments that come to your mind or to your spirit. We usually, with our guests, kind of ask them to start at the beginning. So maybe you could just touch briefly on what was it like for you personally to grow up in the United States as a Black person? Daryl, we'll start with you.
Well, I guess for me, it was kind of a two-part thing because I am originally from Los Angeles. And my experience there, then we moved to Atlanta, or the Atlanta area, when I was 12. And it was like culture shock because moving to the South, it seemed like it was an area that was still fighting a war that was long since over with, like 111 years before had already ended, and that was still being fought. And
and how did that manifest itself? Was it in conversation? Was it in separation? How did you sort of realize that as you came to Atlanta?
And for context, what year was this?
This was 1976 when we moved to the Atlanta area. And it manifested itself in all of the above.
Okay.
It wasn't just, was it this or that? It was, yes, it was all of that.
Got it.
And from the standpoint of when we moved into our neighborhood, and I went to Southwest DeKalb High School, and I saw in the 5 years I was there, because high school was 8th to 12th at that time. In the years that I was there, I saw the demographics of the school change, just like went from white to Black. By the time you could hear it in the band, the way the band played in 1978 was not the way the band played in 1982.
Right? Made some improvements.
It got a lot better. But my experience down here is where I was really exposed more so to racism than anywhere in Los Angeles.
Gotcha.
And when I say that, I mean if I'm riding down the street in my bicycle. Here is where I had Coke cans thrown at me and beer bottles thrown at me, and people would swerve and with their cars and try to drive me off the road. I'd never experienced that in L.A.
Wow.
And so it was, like I said, the racism was more in your face here. And there was a certain appreciation I had for that because I knew where somebody was coming from immediately.
Yeah.
As opposed to the more subtle forms of it.
Got it. Q, you're from Alabama.
Actually, I was born and raised in Savannah, Georgia.
Oh, wow. All right.
I did not move.
What happened?
To my mom's job.
Good Georgia fans come out of Savannah.
My mom's job moved us, but all of my family is from Alabama.
Gotcha.
My dad's side and my mom's side. So we moved back to Alabama in 2007. My mom's job moved us there.
Yeah.
Growing up, though, I didn't really complete opposite of Daryl. Like, I didn't experience it. Savannah was a very mixed culture place. Like, elementary through middle school, I had all ethnicities in my classes: Hispanic, Black, white, Asian. I mean, I didn't notice it.
Yeah.
Until I moved to Alabama in culture shock.
Really?
Like, in my face.
And you went to Birmingham?
Birmingham.
Okay. And
I actually looked up some stats this morning. And it was the school that I went to, it was 76% white, 11% Black, and 7% Hispanic.
Okay.
If that gives you like an overview of how much of a culture shock it was. That's when it sounds weird, but that's when I was like, oh shoot, I'm like the minority.
Yeah.
I never felt like the minority.
In Savannah.
So that's kind of when like the identity crisis, not really a crisis, but that's when, you start to like do things to fit in because you don't want to feel like you're on the outside. So you like adapt the way that they dress, adapt the way that they talk. You try to you're good. I was good in academics, but I wanted to like excel. Like I wanted to not be the stereotype of what they probably thought I should be. So going into college, I went to Alabama, of course, Roll Tide. And
You've heard that twice.
That's when I really
in this
became
podcast.
comfortable with finding my tribe. And it doesn't matter color. I have friends who are white, Hispanic, Black. That doesn't mean anything to me, but that's when I really felt comfortable in my skin because I found people that I wanted to be around instead of being put in a place where I didn't really feel like I was that accepted. Because 76% white, you know. It was a great school, though. Like, I nobody, like, treated me any type of way. It was just, you feel different.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, to all of our listeners, Q is an incredibly talented creative director for the company. And anytime you see our books get published or our properties get upgraded or anything that we put out on email or on social, Q has her gift really touching it. And so anyway, you're just such a blessing to this company. George.
Yeah.
We're going back to a different era from Q's.
Yeah. I am a 54-year-old Black male, and I am a native to Atlanta. I was born in Atlanta, St. Joseph's Hospital.
Wow, Bill Hill.
But here, check this out. I was the only Black baby that was born in St. Joseph's Hospital. So I guess that at that day, June 16th, the year that I was born, and whoever was going through making the birth certificates, I guess they were just checking. So I'm legally on my birth certificate checked as a white male.
That's hilarious.
Seriously.
That is so funny.
No kidding. And so born here in Atlanta, my first recollection of racism here was actually reverse racism, because I'm from Zone 3, which is on the southeast side of Atlanta. I was maybe the only thing that separated the street that I lived on and the east runway at the Atlanta airport, which back then was the Atlanta airport before it was Hartsfield Jackson, was I-75. I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood. And my parents raised us that there was no such thing as color, that there were only people, and we were to defend what was right, regardless of color, because we as Black people had been discriminated against for so many years. And I remember being in kindergarten. This was 1972 in Atlanta, and there was, in my elementary school, for the entire elementary school, we had 3 white people in my entire elementary school. And a group of guys thought it was fun to take and pick out this one white kid and to kind of use him as a punching bag. And I was like, no, not today. You're not just going to beat up on him. Now, I must admit, I jumped in and I got beat up too. But the point of it was, we're not going to do this. We have to be better than this. And growing up in the southeast side of Atlanta, it was kind of rough because it was not the most affluent area of Atlanta, and crime was rampant. There were many days that my parents and my brother and sister were in our house, and someone would break in our house while we were in the house. And that was kind of the norm for the neighborhood. But we were proud of who we were as a people, because my dad was a pastor, and his whole thing in life was treat people the way Jesus treated people. So it didn't matter whether we were Black or white or Hispanic or Asian or whatever ethnicity we were. As people, God created one race, and that was a human race. So it was our job to be the champions of social justice, be the person who breaks up the monotony. If you got a group of Black people here and you see one person over here who's white, who's not associated with, you go and befriend that person, because that's the person who needs you the most. Those other people have friends, and it's not to speak ill of that, because that's just kind of the way that it was back in the 70s, in the early 70s, especially, just coming off of Dr. King's assassination in 1968. In 1972, here in Atlanta, we were still trying to find our way. We were still trying to figure it out. still trying to make sense of it all. But I can remember my mom and dad being, of course, they got called to the school because I was fighting. But the whole point of it was, well, why was he fighting? What was he doing because he was fighting? My child doesn't just fight. What caused him to have the fight? And that was one of the things that when they explained that, hey, there were some kids that, and this is your son's version of it, and this is Tony's version of it. And my mom was like, well, what's the problem? He's not the problem. They're the problem. I don't see any of them in here. So it was kind of a real interesting situation for me because, even though racism was wide and rampant, my first experience with it was not black or white to black, but it was black to white.
Gotcha. So we're in Black History Month, and I'm going to go a little bit off script here for a second, probably a couple times during this discussion. My wife and I went to the Fox Theater a couple weeks ago. We saw Alvin Ailey perform. That was our 5th or 6th time seeing Alvin Ailey. My wife was actually on scholarship with Alvin Ailey in New York at the age of 19, so this is years and years ago, and only on scholarship, so unpaid. But anyway, we love seeing them. They're incredible. Their new artistic director, I shouldn't say new, he was celebrating his 10-year anniversary. I hope this is correct. I think this was Alvin Ailey's first live performance since COVID. I think everything else had been done via streaming or via recording. And you could just tell the artistic director, Robert Battle, who's incredible, and the dancers just seem to be incredibly appreciative to be out and kind of face-to-face. We're not talking about COVID. That's not the conversation. But anyway, we were at the Fox seeing Alvin Ailey, which is awesome. Here's what Robert Battle said. He said, it's great to be at the Fox Theater in Atlanta, kind of the home of the civil rights movement in the United States. We're live, after 2 years of not being live. And he said, it's Black History Month. He said, but I just want to remind everybody that every month has Black history. And so not to set this up or maneuver this in any way, but what does Black History Month mean to each of you, and how should we look at it as a nation or as a society?
I've learned a lot about Black history, and I'm Black, and I've learned a lot about it. I feel like it could be celebrated more throughout the year and not just 28 days.
Yeah.
There's so much of American history that is Black history that isn't celebrated and talked about, just from inventions and science and medical, however you want. Just is so much Black history that's woven into that. And even like having 2 nephews, I think it's more apparent of like Black history and how little is talked about. Having 2 Black nephews and they don't know a lot of things. And I'm just like, they're not teaching you that in school. And they're like, nope, never heard of it.
Wow.
And that's kind of hard, kind of heartbreaking because that's a part of them, and it's just important, I feel like, to talk more about.
I agree. When I was in elementary school, and of course, growing up here in Atlanta, we got a baptism, if you will, of Black history from the time I started elementary school all the way through high school. I went to Morehouse College for a couple of years, so I got an additional extension of Black history. And I think that, to what we're doing now is an enlightenment period. We're continuing to discover more of who we are, not just what's in the printed text of history books, because there's still a lot of unspoken and unrecorded history. And I think that we as a people, as a nation, not just Black people, but the Asian people, the white people, the Hispanic people, have to embrace not just Black history, but all history. And I love the fact that we now as a people, my children grew up we live in a rural part or a suburb of Atlanta, and they don't teach the Black history that I was taught in school. And it was a question. I'm like, well, are you getting anything? And they were like, well, no. So we immediately began to go through the trek of identifying things that they found interesting in our history as people. And you can go through and you can try to do critical race theory in a lot of different areas and a lot of different things. The one thing that is true is that you cannot erase all of history. It's impossible, regardless of how you try. Whether it's printed or not, history is history. And I think that for where we are now, it's important that we try, especially as Black people, because we have been put down, and I've had some negative experiences personally with racism. And I think that it's still incumbent upon ourselves to make sure that we seek out knowledge rather than waiting for someone to give us knowledge. We have too much availability of information to just sit idly by waiting for someone to give me what I should know about myself, my history, or my culture.
Yeah, and I would agree with much of what you just said there. The reason I think that we have, Black History, and I celebrate it year round. It's not, February comes out like, oh, now it's time to kick on Black History. But it is that the contributions of Black people, African American, so forth, have been so long undervalued. And that's only because of the assumptions of those who primarily have been recording history. And we have a tendency, no matter what race we are, of being centric to our own experiences. And so that I'm going to look at certain things through a different filter than maybe you're going to look at them. And if you're the one who's putting out book after book upon encyclopedia upon, or you're the one who's managing the TV stations and the newspapers and so forth, then you're the crafter of the viewpoints that we see. And if you know that these viewpoints have been undervalued, and that's why there is a Black History Month, because it's a recognition that it's been undervalued, then you understand that there's something that you kind of have to do, and it almost feels to some people like an overcorrection. Why are we focusing so much on Black? Why don't we have a White History Month? Why don't we? And you hear all of these things, and it's because a lot of these things, the underlying assumptions have been ignored for so long.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, I'm going to be a bit wordy in kind of introducing this next topic because I want to go really big and then I want to go really small. So really big, I want to talk about the state of race relations in the United States, and then I want to talk about giving companies. We're going to kind of hit, the biggest side and then the smallest side in two discussion points. But I was on a Zoom call with Pastor Derek Hawkins and Pastor Jay Stewart and Pastor Sam Collier. The Giving Company team, of course, knows who these folks are. Sam Collier is the senior pastor at Hillsong, Atlanta, and his wife, Toni Collier, published a book with us. And Jay Stewart and Derek Hawkins also published a book with us called Welded. And I sent around to all of our employees last week an email where the Associated Press had done a story about the book Welded and the story behind the book Welded, which was the merging of a African-American church and a white church in Charlotte right before the Charlotte race riots of 2016. And we were talking about the Sunday service because Sam Collier is going to host Jay Stewart and Derek Hawkins on Sunday at Hillsong Atlanta. And we were talking about talking points, right? You'll know this as a reporter, Daryl. You got, what are the talking points going to be? And so we all sort of mentioned what we thought some of the talking points were. So we each got to kind of contribute a talking point. Dan, what I've heard from this podcast in the 2.5 seasons that we've been doing this, from Sam Collier, Nate Butler, Tony Evans, Lee Jenkins, I know we've had more on here, was the criticality of relationship and how if people are willing to have relationships with people different from them, you're going to create common ground. You're going to create better awareness of one another's realities, just like you were talking about, Daryl. Jay Stewart offered up this idea of a better narrative, how the Refuge Church in Kannapolis, North Carolina is kind of portraying something that's better than sort of what we're hearing about day to day in this country. There was this idea of learning from each other. I think you also alluded to that as well. And then here's the one that I thought was really interesting, which is going to lead to this question, which is moving from declaration to demonstration. And I thought, we do a lot of declaring in this country. We do a lot of tweeting. We do a lot of posting. And there's a fair amount of anger. And then you kind of do what are you doing about it? Can you show me an example? And you get less. Let's just say that. So with that sort of declaration versus demonstration or anywhere in between, how would you describe what it's like today? How is the United States doing today in this area of solving for systemic racism, addressing racial injustice, providing opportunities for racial reconciliation, for relationship, and for a better narrative?
I think there has been progress made, without a doubt. And of course, it gets down to the cliche that we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. I'm not altogether convinced, personally, that there's enough effort going in it on both parts, because it seems as though we're comfortable with whom we're comfortable with, and sometimes we get caught up in the vacuum of who we are versus who we need to be. And I truly believe that, and I was really happy when you came and invited us into this, and just the title of the podcast, Walking Through Samaria. You're thinking about the whole implication behind the Samaritan who was beat up and left for dead, and you've got a Jew, Jewish people walking by, or people of a different ethnic group walking by because they just didn't care enough. And I think that where we've got to get is that we've got to care enough totally as people, not just based on what I see, because what if we were all blind? How would you know who was whom? And I think that we have to look at it, and we have to put our minds to the fact that we should look at each other for who we are rather than what I truly see. If I see you, and we are good about making assumptions about people, and we categorize people based on what we see more often than not. And I think that we've come a long way, David. I really do think that we've come a long way. And I truly believe that we've got quite a distance to go. But it really can only change if everybody, and I mean literally everybody, decides I've got to be different. I've got to be better because I want the world to be better. And it gets beyond my four and no more, It gets beyond me being comfortable in my space with my people, but the world is full of all races, all ethnicities, all backgrounds of people, and we've got to be more tolerant of people versus our idea or just the group that we associate ourselves with. So I feel like we really should make a better effort completely. Blacks, whites, Asians, Hispanics, any ethnic group, even crossing lines that we as Christians would see as we really need to stay away from them. But when we look at Jesus and how Jesus lived and how he acted, he didn't care. Those were the people he was drawn to, and he was criticized for it, but he took the effort to make them feel like he was interested in who they are, and let's be better because that's what we want, and that's what's right.
Well, let me build on that a little bit. To your point about it, what if we were blind? I hesitate to say that would be better. I'd almost think that would be worse, because as a blind person, you have the uncertainty of you can't see what's in front of you. You can't see this thing. I think at the core of racism or whatever, it is not so much hatred as it is fear. Fear is the number one thing. And when you get, because if I fear you, now I'm going to be suspicious of you. Now I'm going to I have two choices. I can run from you and not feel good about myself, or I can confront you. And now I feel like I'm standing up for myself. So I think to David's point, when he was talking about when you have that relationship, that's the thing that breaks down the fear. And you say, hey, this guy's not so bad after all. Or he's, it's not such a, he's not what I thought he was. She's not what I thought she was. I think back to when January the 20th of 2009, and that was the day that Barack Obama was took the oath of office. And I remember it wasn't until he actually got to "So help me God" that I felt like this was actually going to happen. My thought was, and it was a horrible thought, but I was like, somebody's going to take a shot, somebody's going to do something. And when that moment got there, I don't know where it came from, but I just erupted in tears. And my hands shot up. I was just like, I can't believe this, because I never thought in my lifetime I would see anything like that. So, and then to see that, and then to see him reelected was kind of eye-opening for me. So when we ask about the state of race relations in America, yes, we have made a lot of progress. But now I think since then, from 2017, we've seen a backlash. And pendulums just tend to swing that way, whereas you go this far, and then now comes. That's why you always have Democrat followed by Republican, and they get dissatisfied and come back the other way. There's always kind of that swinging back and forth. So I'm not as hopeful or optimistic about race relations in America as maybe some. I tend to see it kind of for what it is. But I think as we break down those barriers, and the barriers that I think the barriers have actually gone up, because we are more isolated in terms of we can say things in the internet that are anonymous. We can spout a tweet off. We don't have to research it. It doesn't have to be true, any of those things. Yep. So now we've kind of gotten behind our little bunkers, and it prevents us from reaching out and establishing real relationship, real fellowship. And so that's why I applaud what Pastor Stewart and Pastor Hawkins are doing in North Carolina, because they're breaking down the walls, they're kicking them down, and they're actually showing. I mean, I was part of it. You and I, David, have talked about being in mega churches, and I was part of a mega church out in DeKalb County that was immensely diverse. I mean, the Chapel Hill Harvester Church, which became the Cathedral of the Holy Spirit, and then there were some problems that developed thereafter. But the way that for that little sweet spot of time, the relationships were just amazing, just absolutely amazing. So the potential remains there. If you can break down the fear, you're gonna break down the assumptions, and the assumptions are what underlies so much of what it is. Because I assume, or you assume, that I'm lesser, or even the Constitution of the United States codified that I was 3/5 of a person. That's still on the books. So the assumptions, if you get away from the assumptions, because the assumptions are where the racism really is. It's not in me calling or being called a slur. You're an inward. No, that's what a lot of people assume. If I don't call him this word, that I'm not racist. If you're already assuming that I'm lesser than you, or that my intelligence is below yours, or that I'm going to steal from you, or I'm going to rape your wife or whoever, then all of that's based on fear. And the assumption's built on the fear, and you start getting this house that's constructed on a really rotten foundation. And as we break down those foundations and we establish real, genuine fellowship, that's where it happened. And it happens, unfortunately, very slowly and in little isolated spots. And then, and I'll tell you about another experience I had a little bit later, but we'll come back to that. I don't want to tie up too much.
Daryl pretty much said it, everything. I think fear is definitely, you pinpointed. That's definitely it. People are just afraid of unknown things. They're afraid of seeing themselves and other people that don't look like them. I definitely think my fiance has experienced more of the fear aspect in his profession. He's in, finance and healthcare, and if you see him, he likes sneakers and he wears hoodies all the time. And he's scruffy and he has curly hair. And someone on the street would not know that he has a master's and he has an MBA and that he's makes, very good money and he's very intelligent, but people just assume. And just dealing with his counterparts is sometimes it's just you think you go forward and then you talk to someone and then just the way that they talk to you or whatever, kind of like 10 steps back. So I think we have made progress, but like Daryl said, it's easier for people to be the opposite of what they show you in person because they have Twitter and Instagram. And
That's right.
I've seen people that I've known for like 10 years. Once, things really happened with like Ahmaud Arbery and a lot happened during COVID. They were complete opposite of who I thought they were from what they were saying on Facebook. And it was just like, I thought you were, a really great person, but you're saying these things. So I don't know. I want to be positive and say yes, that things will get better, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's good
reality.
feedback. I think it's a good kind of pulse to take of the country where you think a lot of progress has been made and maybe it has in certain areas, but you hear from real people that you're in relationship with, that you go to work with, and you get a different perspective, which is super helpful. Q, I'll start with you on this next question because we're going to take it all the way down to giving company. And Dan, I'd like for you to jump in as a Latino to this question. And this is one of those where George, as our chief experience officer, knows we kind of thrive on feedback around here, but sometimes it's hard, So I kind of want to run out of the room after I ask this question, and then you guys can get back to me. But I'll ask it and ask that you be just completely honest for the purposes of helping me and for our listeners to understand. How can Giving Company do better in fostering diversity, inclusion, awareness, understanding? What are the things that we just could do better? What can we get better at?
You're already doing it right now.
Conversations
having
like
this
this.
Conversation. This is the first company I've ever been in that has celebrated Black History Month or even talked about it. That's a problem.
For sure. Yeah.
And I'm 28, yes. And it's never happened.
Does she, George? She's at least.
Am I 28? The numbers. But this is huge, that you're talking and you're open to talking about it with your employees and having books published by Black authors and celebrating those Black authors is huge. So this is a good starting point. I think if you start here, the trajectory can only go up.
It's good.
Well, I would heartily agree with Q on that. And I'm not just saying that because you're there, because you said some things before that I've said, hey, wait a minute here about that. So,
I'm sure.
Yes. So, but I think to her point about what we're doing now, this is definitely a foundational part, because you cannot have reconciliation without recognition. And if you don't have the one, you can't have the other. If you recognize there is a problem and you're willing to roll up your sleeves and say, well, what can we do about this? And where are we falling short? Because you're not assuming that we've got it together. And there's a lot of places who will, okay, we did this and we did that, so now we got it together. Or, I came from a place where, we were filling job descriptions and so forth. And somebody asked out loud in the company, they asked, are we going to hire a minority or are we going to hire the best qualified? And I was like,
in this company?
No. I'm saying not this company, not Giving Company. But I'm saying having come from a company where that happened, where I actually heard that, and the automatic, like I talked about, the assumption was that the minority and the best qualified couldn't be the same one thing. And the same person.
Yeah.
So there are people who will do licks and promises and so forth. And I wouldn't say that's the case here. I think the the desire for feedback, the desire for introspection, all of that is, I have found it to be genuine because it's backed up by other things that when you're not conscious of that, whether it's just, how's your day going? I mean, you showed up at my church at my ordination. I was like, they said, David's out there. I was like, what? I was like, what?
Your church was extremely welcoming.
I was about to say, I have never experienced that before. I had to come out and see it for myself. I was like, it is him. And I think it was you that told me he was out there, because that's David's truck out there. And I was like, David's here?
Which also may have stood out in the parking lot. I might add.
It was
the lifted F-150.
It was a rather large vehicle that.
Not that that's necessarily a cultural differentiator, but it was the only lifted F-150 in the parking lot.
But having said all of that, I mean, the desire for feedback, the desire to ask the question is half the battle, because you realize already, okay, there must be things we can do better. If not, what are we overlooking? What did I think I was doing right, but maybe it came across and I didn't mean for it to come across that way, and because there has not been retaliation or whatever when a point is brought out and it is accepted as, hey, okay, here's something we can get better, or I think that's the foundational aspects of actually getting better, and I wish more people would do like that. Like I said, when I first came here, I was like, where y'all been all my life? I was like, so.
And if I did, if the past place where I did work, it would be like under the table. It wouldn't be like out loud. Do you know what I mean? Like I was the only Black artist at my previous job, and my boss, she was really great. She was nice, but she would slide me something kind of like, Happy Black History Month, but not like, give me a nice little note, but not something like, hey, y'all, let's celebrate this. She's not the only one in the company. She's the only one in our team. Let's still celebrate it. So yeah, this is huge.
Well, I appreciate it, Dan. We'll come to you next. But I do want to say, what I loved about the declaration to demonstration kind of comment is, I think I don't know how else to say this, so I'm just going to say this, but I think in some cases, white people don't know what to do. And so in today's kind of social environment or political environment, all they can do is yell at other white people. And I'm like, I just don't know that that's helping that much. You know what I mean? And I actually I do want to compliment African Americans, because I feel like you all are saying, let's have a relationship. Let's be in conversation. Let's understand. And you have kind of this movement of white people who don't want to be seen as part of the problem. And so all they know to do is just yell at other people. And it doesn't seem to help much, I guess, is just my observation. It might be overly harsh, but anyway. Dan, how's Giving Company doing?
How's Giving Company doing? I think Giving Company's pretty good. I've never, I did have an experience back in the day in the early.
Tell everybody about it. I've heard this.
You
need to tell everybody.
Yeah. So I got this job based on a college recruiter when I graduated. She said, hey, there's this Christian company opening up. And I was like, I don't know, maybe not. And I was like, I don't know, maybe not. I wanted to do more music stuff. I'm a sound engineer, so I kind of wanted to do that. I wasn't so sure what a Christian company would have, But she sent my information in anyways. So I came for the interview, and, I'm fresh out of college. It's, it's a legit job. It's probably the biggest amount of money I'm coming in, So I was like, okay, I'll take it. And I hadn't graduated yet. I had technically already graduated, but I hadn't walked yet. So we had 4 or 5 interns. One of them was white, 3 of them were Black. And one of the higher ups of the company came up to me, and I told him, I said, hey, I won't be here Friday. I have to walk for graduation. And he goes, so Dan, are you the first person from your family to graduate? And I was like, no, why would you think that? I was like, my father's a psychologist, my mother's a dentist, so why would you think that? Oh my gosh, he turned blood red, like, he immediately knew. And then later talking to the interns, he was like, yeah, he asked all the black interns and he asked me. And like, I didn't feel good, you know what I mean? But also, like, I looked at him, I was like, you weren't really asking from a place of hate or anything like that. It was just, being a dumbass. Sorry,
maybe ignorant. I was gonna say ignorant.
You know what I mean? Yeah, like it was just like a and I was like, oh, you probably just don't know anyone like me at all, huh?
It's true.
Yeah. You probably just don't know anyone like me. So, and that's happened before in life, and it's kind of like a weird thing because, I'm obviously not black, you know what I mean? To some people, I'm not obviously Latino. They'll say I'm white passing or, so it always depends on where I am and like who's really looking and who's like privy to have Latino friends, I guess, you know what I mean? Or maybe what I'm wearing. But I've been able to go everywhere my whole life, in every crowd. I grew up with every different type of friend. But me and my black friends knew we weren't white, especially when it came to going over to like my white friends' houses. And it was not all of them. There was plenty of white families that I went to that was like, oh, didn't look at me any different. But the second I started dating girls, that was a thing. The white parents like, why are you bringing a Mexican kid around? I'm not even Mexican, I'm Colombian, but it was that kind of thing, like, and it was like a big problem. Like it would happen a lot. And I remember a teacher saying like, you really like white girls, huh? And I was like, like that kind of thing like that. So I think that was like, growing up, like there was a real connection with like, with black kids that like, that we knew we weren't white. So it was like black kids and Latin kids were really tight and like kind of rolled in the same circles. But I had tons of white friends too. I had tons of Asian friends, and it's kind of hard to like not like somebody that you have as a friend. You know what I mean? So it was kind of like when I see some people, when I see a white guy, I don't automatically assume he's racist. Even like, the country kind of looking dudes, the lifted truck dudes. I'm like, well, I had a lot of buddies like you in high school.
It's my daughter's truck.
Yeah, like I had buddies like that in high school. But I've also seen some real racist dudes that, you know what I mean, that it's like it's kind of hard to tell. But it's a dumb mentality to have, and it's an old mentality to have. Yeah. And I think like as like we start looking at more like the younger demographic, I feel like it's fading. I mean, racist people have done they do their job to ingrain their beliefs into their children, so that like racist people, like they ingrain that in them with homophobia. They try to carry it on, but I think it's dying out. I really do think it's dying out. It's not gone. It's not gone. But I would hope that in 200 years, 300 years, this will probably be a pretty old way of looking at the world, because slavery and all that, it's not that long ago. It's not really that long ago. When you look at like the timeline of life, the world, history, really we're not that far separated from it yet.
I mean, my parents went to a segregated school.
Yeah.
My parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my dad can tell me stories about like him coming over here and like seeing like Klan rallies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, that's a long time ago.
Ugh.
It's easy. It kind of feels longer for me because I wasn't, around to see it. But there's still plenty of people who are around to see that. So we're really not that far removed from it.
Well, our very first podcast, this is where it kind of hit home for me. You mentioned 1976, and I was 9 years old in 1976. I certainly remember it. I think the desegregation of Louisville schools happened in 1974, where I grew up. Anyway, Lee Jenkins, Dan, our very first podcast, he's a few years older than me, maybe 4, something like that. And he played football at the University of Tennessee with Reggie White. Everything has a college athletic sort of connection to it, Dan, sorry. But he mentioned he was 5 years old. He and a friend went to the community pool, I believe, the city pool in downtown Atlanta, and that was his first confrontation with a police officer. And You have to go back and listen to our very first podcast to our listeners, because I can't do it justice for what that experience was for him. And I'm like, what if like that could have been me? I mean, from an age perspective, obviously not from an ethnicity perspective. It's not history yet, unfortunately. You know, I mean, that's the reality. All right, Mr. Chief Experience Officer, you're in charge of culture at this company. So how are we doing?
Thank you. I am glad that I am going last. I think that we are doing a really, really good job here at Giving Company, regardless of what is happening outside of our walls with other companies, other organizations. We tend to look at people for people. Here at Giving Company, we are a very diverse group. We have lots of different ethnic backgrounds here. We employ people from lots of
ages,
like
everything, right?
I mean, from one side to the other, from millennials to Gen Y to Gen Z, millennials, baby boomers. We've had baby boomers in the past. So ethnic groups, we really have gone a long way, even on our leadership team. We have women on our leadership team. We have, I'm a black male and I'm on the leadership team. So we are not just the cookie cutter organization as it relates to what we look like. And I truly believe that as we grow, because we have a desire, and that's what it really, to me, comes down to. You've got to want to be different. You've got to want to look different, and you've got to want to have the best of the best, regardless of what he or she looks like. And that's what we're really most engaged with here at Giving Company, is hiring the best person for the job, regardless of what they look like, regardless of where they come from. Because truly, when we grow out, to be who we are fully capable of being, you'll be able to look at us and say, wow, that is really a forward-thinking organization. And we've gone out of our way to make sure that we keep that in front of who we are. When we sit and we talk about staffing, when we talk about projects, even from who we employ from a contract perspective, we're very, very diverse. And I don't think, and just to even give you an idea, as a Christian organization, we've had Muslims work here. We've had people who were Buddhists work here. It doesn't matter. If you can do the job, that's what we want you here for, is to do the job. Now, we'll be very upfront about who we are, and we want to let you know we don't mind that that's who you are, and we hope you don't mind that that's who we are, but we want you here to do a really good job. And, to a point that someone else made earlier, I was going to say this, as a grandfather of two biracial boys. I have one biracial grandson and one on the way. The generation that is a couple of generations behind me, they have absolutely no care or concern, mostly, and I'll say that mostly because sure, you have small pockets, but they're more concerned about who I love and who I fit best with. It doesn't matter to me what color you are. It doesn't matter to me what kind of degree your parents have on the wall. Do I love you, and do I want to build a life with you? And that is very encouraging to me, because I think that as it relates to race generations, or what are we saying? Race relations, I'm sorry, race relations, the younger generation and each generation that goes deeper will get better with it. And it will eventually get down to where if you are someone who holds race as a big deal, you're going to be in the extreme minority, because they're saying that by 2050, there are going to be more biracial children or interracial, biracial children than ever. And that speaks to what people value the most in people, not their color, but the content of their character.
I appreciate your all's feedback. And one of the things that we have here at Giving Company is a culture club. And so it helps us, I think, at least head in the right direction. And I'm certain that there's plenty of mistakes that we've made historically with me here. I will say, in my entire career, this is my opinion, and if I'm all wrong, when the data comes up or whatever. But I truly believe if you seek to hire the best person, you are naturally going to get a diverse team. I've just always felt that way. And frankly, at my time at GE, my time at McKesson, my time in private equity, and now my time here in nonprofit world, I just believe that's how it plays out. Now, you can choose to be a little more intentional, maybe in certain areas if that's appropriate. But I still believe the natural result of hiring the best person for the best job is going to naturally lead you in the direction of diversity. I just do. I always have. All right, 2 more questions for you guys. And one is, again, maybe a little more corporate, and then we're going to go back to individual. So, which is how we do our employee surveys, by the way, right, George? Anyway, so one of the things that I think has been good for Christianity has been the role of the Black church in moving us forward as a country and as a society. And probably rightly so. Very often, the role of the church in the discussion, there's an automatic default to the white church, and frankly, the lack of active engagement and progress and championing. And I realize I'm generalizing here, but you guys get where I'm coming from. The better of the 2 characters in that play has been the Black church. And, even I think John Lewis, right, who passed away here in Georgia relatively recently, he unapologetically, he said it was his faith that was causing him to be a part of the movement and the conversation. Of course, Dr. King and many others. But I would largely kind of give an A to the Black, as a grade, to the Black church for the progress here. And again, society kind of wants, I don't know if it's just our nature to point to the bad versus the good, but the church, you probably have to split in 2. But I would say, gosh, if you're the Black church, you've been a big part, maybe the most significant part of progress of race relations in this country. So let's go back to the big C for the purposes of this conversation. Where do you all think the church is today in this particular topic? And if you have to separate it in terms of your answer, that's okay. But I'd sure love to kind of talk big C for the next few minutes about where is the church and what can they do better? And one more thing, again, sorry to be so wordy. Dan and I, we've been doing this 1.5 years now, something like that, Dan. And Batya Ungar-Sargon, who actually wrote the original newspaper article about the story of Welded before we published the book, has been on our podcast twice. And she said, David, evangelicals should be the driving force of compassion and justice in this country. And they've let the narrative be taken from them by a political party. And she said, it's just, and of course, when I think evangelicals, our listeners need to hear this, I think about 660 million around the world, more in Africa and in Latin America than in the United States. I don't think about it in terms of how you may hear it in the political circles today. There's about 70 million evangelicals in the U.S., and if I had to guess, I'd say there's probably more white than non. But point being, I look at it as the big E, the global movement, and again, the big C. So in thinking about where is the church at today, how can we be leading the call to compassion for the undocumented, for people of color, for any minority, right? Anybody who's marginalized. How can we be seen as the champions of justice? So give us your best advice and thoughts on the church, its role. How is it doing?
I'll go first.
That's a loaded question.
Right?
As a pastor, an African-American pastor of an African-American Baptist church in a predominantly white part of the county that I serve, we take the onus on ourselves. Again, we're not waiting for people to come to us to say, how can we serve you? And I think that that's part of the divide that we have, is that people are waiting, especially in the Black church, for waiting for people to come and say, "How can we serve you?" We're in a minority in Douglas County is still predominantly white as a demographic within the county, and there has been an influx of Hispanic and Black into the county, and it has caused a rift, to be very honest with you. And there is a lot of what has been referred to as white flight, where people are trying to get out because, and I heard this with my own ears, it's awfully dark in this room now. And I heard that was as recently as 2020. So we're not looking for ways to get out. We're looking for ways to serve the people who are there. And I think that the church has to take it upon itself. The church is a living organism. The church has to find people who need resuscitation, find people who are in need, wherever they are, whatever color they are. And we have to go to them to say, hey, this is who we are. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we have these resources. How can we help you? How can we serve you? And to be very honest with you, when someone is in dire need, they don't care what color the person is that's helping them. All they need is, or want is, I need help. And we go out and we look for places and we look for people that we can serve in our community. We give away food, we're giving away clothing, we're connecting people with shelters. We're a small church, so we don't have a lot of area, but we have deep resources. So I think the church has to do its part, because we have to live up to the Great Commission, because the commission that Jesus gave was to go. The commission didn't say sit and wait. The commission didn't say serve only those who have this or that. The commission was to go ye therefore and teach all nations. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to break the barrier. We've got to be the ones to want to include people who don't look like us in who we are and what we do. One of the greatest things that I'm trying to get instituted in our church is because my grandchildren, I want them to see or be in a church where people look like them, where it doesn't just where you just see all Black or all white, because you're not. You're a mixture, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but you need to see people who look like you. And the church has to be open to having people that don't look like each other, because truly, when we all get to heaven, there's nowhere in the Bible that I've read where there's a section for Blacks or a section for whites, a section for Hispanics, a section for this or a section for that. The Bible refers to heaven as a place, and we're all going to be in that one place. And I think that we, as the church, the Black church, not only were we instrumental and in the right to get civil rights for Blacks, but civil rights exist for all people, for all races, for all denominations, for anyone who is marginalized, anyone who feels less than, anyone. And the doors of the church should swing open to whomever it is that needs help from the church. And we don't have a right to decide who comes in and who comes out of our doors.
I feel like during, quarantine, this brought out a lot in people. They had to sit with themselves. I feel like we need to take politics. If politics could remove themselves altogether from Black churches, white churches, I think we'd be better off. I've personally seen more churches include just politics into things, and then it makes the race part of it just, I don't know. Yeah, it makes it messy. I was attending a church in Birmingham, and some things had come out about how he really felt towards Black people. And he has Black people, white people, Asian, all type of demographics in his congregation. And I immediately lost trust.
Yeah.
Because I was just like, but I've been following, this church, and you've been my pastor since I was in college. And then I kind of also had a like a come to Jesus moment, like, oop, I was putting too much trust in a person. That's where I kind of messed up. But I don't know. I've also experienced that in Atlanta, attending another, and I guess you would consider them mega churches, where politics, you can just tell, are really huge in the way that they teach to their congregation, and that's just really not of the Bible. That's my opinion.
Yeah, it's good.
And I don't know. I feel like we just need to communicate and talk. Churches need to be more open to talking and talking about things that make them uncomfortable. Nobody wants to talk about things that make them uncomfortable. And then we're back to square one.
Yeah.
And then we're separated. And there's a black church and a white church and an Asian church. And just like, let's just all go to church. Let's just all, sing and be happy and merry and get the word of God. The word is the same. It's not black, white, Asian.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion.
It's so good, Q. I heard John Ortberg a couple weeks ago, and he was referencing somebody. So to my listeners, my apologies for not remembering, but he talked about the first century church. And he said, here's how the first century church was defined. Incredibly diverse. So they in fact had to stop referring to it as a Jewish movement because of all the diversity that the first century church had attracted. Compassion for the poor, sexual purity, care for the unborn and the young babies, and then just an incredible amount of grace and hospitality. And so he said, okay, let's break it down. This is him talking, not me. On the left, you have the compassion for the poor and embracing diversity. On the right, you have the calls for sexual purity and support for the unborn and the young. And he said, in neither party do you have the grace and the desire to find common ground or whatever. And I thought it was just such a good way of sort of describing, like, if the church is trying to find a political solution, you're going to get stuck somewhere. And that's just the way it is. So I think that's really well said. Daryl, go ahead. I'm sorry. Big C.
No, take your time. Take time. Martin Luther King once said that the 11 o'clock hour in America was the most segregated hour in the country, because you had your whites going to the white church, you had the blacks going to the black church, and so forth and so on. Part of the problem, when you ask the question of how do I see the big C church functioning, is my experience with that is more limited to United States, this country.
Sure, exactly.
And as such, we tend to think that America was a Christian nation. It was formed as a Christian nation, which I don't think could be further from the truth. And as a result of that, we tend to think then, therefore, that if America was formed as a Christian nation, then American Christianity is really what God approves of. And I think we have to get the American part of it out of it. I think that's because if you're based on, if the seeds of your country were formed in racism, and I hate to say it, but it was. I mean, that was the economy. That was how all of these things. You had second-class citizens based solely on the fact that they were of this race and so forth. I think we have to get beyond the Americanism in our Christianity, because that robs us of the ability to speak as Christians. We need to be able to speak with a certain impartiality, where we can speak as more the voice of God and what God would have in this situation, rather than what American Jesus would have in this situation. Because that has always been my problem with what I know of as the evangelicals in this country, is because they have so ceded the voice of God to the voice of the party. And so now you get these guys like Robert Jeffress or all these who come from this ultra-conservative kind of political viewpoint that colors their Christianity. They're not able now to speak to real ills that are happening because they've got to be silent because they'll fall on the wrong side of this vast base of people. And so as we begin to speak more as, like you're talking about, you said that the church was built on this incredible diversity. I mean, the Apostle Paul was, when he was Saul of Tarsus, was going to all these different places because it was so diverse. He was traveling from place to place.
Yep.
So once we divest ourselves and we recognize that we are first and foremost citizens of the kingdom of God, and now we start speaking as that and start living as that, that's when I think the church, big C, starts to find its way. Because as long as you're speaking as American first, you can't, it's like Jesus said, you cannot serve two masters. For either you'll love the one and despise the other, or you'll cling to one and you'll hate the other. And so you can't hold on to this first and that and then the other. It just doesn't work. So as we speak and we recognize ourselves as citizens of the kingdom of God, we do more of what we're talking about in this podcast. We talk about going to the other side of the road. We talk about conquering some of the fears that make me want to walk on the other side of the road. And I'll tell you an experience, and I have a picture here of a guy who we connected a couple of years ago. And we met in college under rather inconvenient circumstances.
You dated the same girl?
No.
That would be inconvenient.
That would be very inconvenient. But I was beginning my journalism career and as a sports writer, and I was covering an intramural softball game. And there was a rather heated moment that came on the scene, and I was doing my best to be the objective, impartial journalist, chronicling, taking my photos and whatnot. And one of the guys was just telling me where he was going to stick the camera if I didn't, it was, like I said, inconvenient to say the least.
Gotcha.
And so, it was one of those moments fraught with racial tension and so forth. And I didn't really think that much of it at the time because it wasn't so terribly unusual that this would necessarily happen. Turns out that many years later, 30 some odd years later, this guy finds me on Facebook. And he's still feeling bad about something that happened 34 years ago. And he makes it and he says, I want to take you out to lunch. And everything within me is like, this is not good. This is not a good idea. But I'm thinking even thinking in terms of this podcast, I'm thinking, the Samaritan walks on the other side. He goes into that place that's uncomfortable. I think God would have me go to this place, even though I've got one eye on the door. It's like, if this goes the wrong way, I'm like, let's kind of go our separate ways. And he was apologizing. He was profusely apologetic about, I assumed that because you were black, you were this, and you were up to no good, and you were da-da. And he just, and I said, you've been carrying this with you for 34 years? Wow. I said, forget that. And then now he starts asking the same question that you were asking about. Well, how can I do better? How can I said, first of all, you can't approach this from a position of guilt. You cannot approach it from a position of guilt. You cannot approach it from a position of defensiveness. But you have a certain sphere of influence. You have I called it a little patch of grass. Yeah. That you can only be responsible for that little patch. You can keep your patch of grass weed free as best you can. It's good. Do what you can in that. Yeah. And you maybe you influence the adjacent patch of grass and the adjacent one here and there. And that's how this thing grows. But you can't solve this. No, there's no one group of white people, no one group of any people that can solve it all by themselves because the problem has gone way, way beyond that. So as you, in your individual jurisdictions, because that's what jurisdiction's all about, is I say what the law is. I speak the law. I have jurisdiction of this little part of what God made me responsible for. See, when I come before the judgment, when you come before the judgment, you're not going to be judged on what somebody else did or didn't do. You're going to be judged on what you did, what you knew, what you had access to, what you had the ability and the opportunity to do. And so in that moment, we had a great lunch after that. It was like, I made a Facebook friend. I was like, this is the most unlikely thing. But if I had allowed my fear, if I had allowed my fear to say, this is not where I need to go, we never would have had that.
Yeah.
So, the big church, as you start speaking more as not a black person or a white person, but as a citizen of the kingdom of God, where it talks about in the word, it says there were people from every tribe and nation and language, and I couldn't even count them because there were so many of them. That's what John saw in the Revelation. He didn't just see, 1 minute he sees 144,000 of Jews, and the next minute it's just all of a sudden exploded. That's how the kingdom, that's why the Bible says the kingdom. It started like a small boulder, and it just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. And so in each of our individual existences, if we can be that little piece of growth, then the big C starts to really look like the big JC. It really starts to be his body. It really starts to be something that, can speak with authority, because we can't speak as authoritatively as Americans. Well, we can speak authoritatively as Christians, because it was the church that he said the gates of hell would not prevail against it. So if we can tie into that voice and speak what we're hearing from above and not from our right wing or left wing talking points and so forth, that's where the big C has the power. But it loses the power when it steps back and it can't speak to what's wrong with this and what's wrong with that situation without being afraid of political repercussions, because there will be repercussions. Jesus said, you will be persecuted. You can count on that, but we don't want to be persecuted. We don't even want to be uncomfortable. And that's what, when we talk about critical race theory, and I don't want my child to feel like he's uncomfortable. So now we start assembling teachers who will say what we want. And that's what, the gospel talks, the New Testament talks about, when we assemble teachers that have itching ears. Because we don't want to hear this, we want to hear that. We want to hear this little situation here and so forth. And sometimes we have to hear that's uncomfortable in order to speak as the big C like we're supposed to.
Yeah, that's good. So let's kind of take that as a cue, Daryl, if you don't mind, for our last question. And again, with a little bit of a preamble, which you guys have probably noticed by now that I do. As a person who's in technology, as a mathematician and a scientist, I've found it strange that in the information age, people are choosing to use unlimited access to information as a way to create division as opposed to better understanding. And my bias in this is that the more information you have, the more balanced your perspective will be. That's my bias. That's not how we're using information. That's not how we're using technology. Maybe not information as in this country, as we're using it as a means to division, not as a means to create common ground and create better awareness and more balance, if you will. So with that and your patch of grass analogy, which I really like, this is Dan and I's podcast about the Good Samaritan. And the Good Samaritan, according to the parable of Luke chapter 10. Since we've been gone for a few weeks, Dan, I'll remind our listeners what that's all about. Daryl alluded to it. There's a few things that are inherent in that parable. First is the road was dangerous, right? So the road from Jerusalem to Jericho had robbers and thieves. And so if you're walking on the road, you're sort of in a place of danger just to begin with. Talking about fear. And then in that particular time of Jesus telling the parable, Samaritans and Jews were politically, racially, ethnically, socially, culturally, economically at odds with one another. And Jesus, as a Jew, decides in one of the most profound parables that anybody will ever hear, whether you believe in the Bible or not, to make the hero of the story a Samaritan. And he describes how the Samaritan's brave enough to walk across the road, takes care of the Jewish person medically and economically and nutritionally, and goes above and beyond, which is inherent in the scriptures, period. Walk the extra mile, turn the other cheek, etc. And so Dan and I created this podcast to just highlight real stories of people who are being good Samaritans, not rescuing a cat out of a tree, not changing a tire by the side of the road. Not that that's not important, but the parable of the Good Samaritan was given for, I think, very specific reasons about whom we should consider heroes on earth and in heaven. So with that preamble, which again, our listeners have heard many, many times, what's one thing that Christians can do that would be your advice? One thing that would make us all a little bit more like the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10, verses less. In the area of racial reconciliation, systemic injustice, etc.
I would say don't be afraid to go across the street, much like the Samaritan, because you're going to have people in your ear telling you that that's not a good idea. You're going to have things that the inherent risks that are already present and prevalent that you're going to have to go against. And then you're going to have to realize that it's going to take some of your own personal, either finance, time, resources, a lot of things. And we've got to make the first step. We've got to choose to do better. We've got to choose to make this thing a priority for each, like Daryl related it to, and you've alluded to it several times, and as has Q, it has to be a personal decision. I can't do it because of what you would do or what you would do, because I have to make the decision for myself and for the relationship with my brothers and sisters of all races for myself. I've got to make that choice for myself.
David alluded to the way that we use information and technology, and I've often thought of the definition of wisdom is not so much knowledge and what you know, but how you use what it is that you know. And so we need to be seekers of wisdom, and all you're getting, get an understanding. And the Bible tells us very clearly that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And so it's going to start in each of our hearts from a standpoint of how do I use the information that I have? Because, like you said, George, this area was dangerous and so forth and so on. Well, it's dangerous for all of us just as Black people in America. We don't have to go looking for danger. It's already present when I walk out the door, or even if I don't walk out the door.
Yeah, it's a valid point.
I mean, if I'm driving up 285, I can be pulled over at any time, and I can make what may look like an innocuous move to the rest of us, but now I have somebody who says, I was in fear for my life. There's that fear again. So I think if we search for within ourselves and we understand from a spiritual perspective how to use the information that we have, with the access that, what I may know about you or what you may know about me, if I use that in the way that Jesus used that. Jesus wasn't afraid, to be called something less than what he was. Oh, you're a friend of the adulterer. You didn't stone that woman. You're hanging out with sinners. And he was unapologetic for that, because that was his call. That's all of our calls. It's not he didn't say for us to separate ourselves in terms of being away from people. He said, separate yourselves from evil. That's the kind of things that you should kind of try to divest yourself of, is not of people. People, I want you to be fishers of men. I want you to be wise as serpents, but harmless as doves. So, he has told us, if we're wise and we use the information and we use it instead of to separate ourselves, to see, and like I said, we can't, if it looks like it's too big a thing, do what you can do where you are.
Yeah.
For as long as you can do it, and that's what, but what Amos says, no, it's Micah, I think it is, that talks about walking before your God and doing justice, and walking humbly before your God and doing justice. So that's all any of us, I think, can do. And as we're proactive about it, as we're not waiting, like George said, for it to come to us, but now we're on the offensive. We're not playing defense anymore, but we're being an offensive force for good. That I think is where it starts. And if not enough people do it, that shouldn't stop me. If you're not doing it and he's not doing it, I still have to go. I still have to do. If you're not going to go, you're not going to hinder me. So that's kind of how I see it, as it's a lot of small action, but it's always in the details. The small things are what God really pays attention to. That's why he says, if you're faithful over a little thing, you'll also be faithful over much.
Yeah, it's good.
I don't really have much to say. George and Daryl basically summed it up. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I agree. Both of those were great. That was nail on the head.
I think going to a Georgia game, Q, would be a good way for you to be a good Samaritan. Yeah, go to Athens and experience one between the hedges. What do you think?
I don't think so. I'm not interested.
Well, as...
David, I would do that for you. I would not wear any paraphernalia.
There you go. Yeah,
I would do that.
That's right. Well, let me just say as we close, I probably don't do this enough to you all individually or collectively, just how lucky we are to have you, Q, you, Daryl, you, George, as part of Giving Company. You add so much to, you, Dan, as well. You add so much to our spirit, our vibe. We call it our vibe, around here, our culture, our success. You guys are just an amazing part of the team, and I'm just so fortunate to be able to have conversations like this and to be able to work with you all on a daily basis. It really is a delight. And so I want to thank all of you for being, yeah, that's right. I want to thank all of you for being a part of this conversation and for being a part of the company. It's just awesome to be associated with y'all. I really mean that.
Can I throw in one last thing, David?
Yeah.
Most organizations' teams tend to mirror their leader, their coach, and I can honestly say that since your tenure here at Giving Company, we have truly taken on the persona of a David Henriksen, who is one who is inclusive, diverse in his thought process and how he leads, and he encourages people to reach across the table, to shake hands, and to be collaborative. And that's exactly what we are, because that's who you are. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. I'm so grateful to be here. David, you've been awesome. All the leadership that you've brought into Giving membership. I'm giving member. That's on my brain.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. By the way, we'll add the commercial in later.
It's a task and a sauna. Giving Company has been amazing. I feel valued here, which is huge. It's just awesome having this conversation and being open just to hearing what everyone has to say, including Dan. It's been awesome. I'm very grateful.
Well, I would agree with that as well. I think even though I think your tongue slipped a little bit. I think David has been diversive and subversive because he has and as in your position, because like the word says, to whom much is given, much is required, and I think you have, as from where I'm sitting, you have done your best to answer that call. If I'm in a position of much influence, then much is required. And I think you have done that. And I think you have, when I say you're subversive, you've gone against certain grains that, might have been comfortable, might have been easy. You haven't taken the easy way out. And I have admired that ever since we were in the location over on Morris
Road.
When I'm looking at the office structure, and here's the CEO, and he's right out there with everybody else. And I'm like, now that's different, because every time I've gone up to CBO, he's been up in the penthouse.
I loved that cubicle. I love that cubicle. That was really a good place to work. He's
so far separated that he would never rub shoulders. He would know me and that was a funny story. At the AJC, they were so separated sometimes that when they had new hires, they'd actually have to put their pictures next to the elevators because they didn't know who the new guy was. That's how separated. But you're like right there with the great unwashed, and you're out there with the rest of us, and that's been refreshing. It's little things like that people might take completely for granted. It's always the little things that you take that for granted. And when you see it, because if you see if he's willing to do that, he's willing to do this, and he's willing to do that. And it's positive assumptions that flow, and then you actually see them lived out. And that's the probably the most important thing is we can all talk a good game. We can all talk a good game, but it's when you walk the walk that really makes. And that's what the Samaritan parable is about. Everybody else walked the walk, but it was on the other side.
On the other side, yeah. Yeah.
There was fear. There was all kind of stuff that could have happened, and this guy charges right there in the middle of it. And it's like, hey, if it happens to me, I go to be with the Father, and he says, "Well done. Just sit over there and next guy up."
Well, you all are very gracious. You would have done well in the first century church. I can definitely say that. I think one of the things, Dan, that we've kind of learned from today that maybe I should give an encouragement to anybody who's in leadership out there, or frankly, anybody who's in community, is just the wisdom that is around you. If you're just willing to hear from people, if you're just willing to have dialogue, if you're willing to have conversation, there's all kinds of wisdom out there. You don't have to go to the cesspool of Twitter or whatever else it might be to find wisdom. It's right there around you. And I think that's been my big takeaway, Dan, from today.
Very good.
Yeah.
Super grateful to have everybody on today.
That was awesome, you guys. Thank you so much.
It's funny that you said that because when I think back to not the parable, I think back to Naaman the Syrian, and I think of here's a guy who had leprosy and he was just in a bad way, and he's just and he's supposed to go to the prophet Elisha for healing, and Elisha doesn't even come to look at him, doesn't even come out in anything, whatnot, and so he stamps off in a rage because they didn't bow down to him. He's this great Syrian general, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I can't. There's better waters than over here. And it was the little servant. It was the little servant to say, he asked you to do a light thing. And so because the servant could see with the eyes of humility what the general could not see with the eyes of pride, this guy got healed. And so when you're looking, it's all in how when you say there's founts of wisdom everywhere. It might be the servant guy.
Yeah.
Or it might
Absolutely.
it might be the janitor, and you say, "Oh, what's this guy doing? How could he must have made a bad career choice or whatnot." No. He might be right where he's supposed to be then to make change.
It's great.
Great.
Dan, that's it for today, man. That was a pretty nice way to come back from our little
one for the books
sabbatical.
Definitely, probably our longest episode.
Nice.
Yeah.
What are you saying, Dan?
I'm saying we did good. It's like we gave the people what they want.
Well, to all of our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in today. To Daryl, Q, and George, what a delight it has been. Dan, it's good to be back, brother.
Love it.
I think I'll see you next week.
Yep.
On the Walking Through Samaria podcast.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, guys. For more content like this, visit us at givingcompany.com. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Walking Through Samaria.